Well, so many things are always asking for attention here, but one that you have seen a quote earlier, you may have seen that quote earlier ascribed to Senator Bashir, who we are speaking right now. He joins us to give us a little more understanding of what are all of these conversation about grazing routes or not. So many other things to discuss with him this morning. Senator Ajibola Bashiru is chairman, Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs. Thanks for joining us this morning, Senator. Well, let's begin with the obvious. Looking back at the laws, the judgments, constitution, and all of that, that conversation about grazing reserves, grazing routes, just doesn't seem ready to abate. Where exactly do we stand? Senator, do you mind unmuting your microphone? We can barely hear you. Senator, we can't hear you. If you can unmute your microphone so we can take the conversation further.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, please. Let me just say. Yes, what I was saying was that it's not a case of any debate actually going on. What I did as a senator and my capacity as a citizen of Nigeria, knowledgeable in the area, was to point out the fact that apparently our president had been misadvised by his legal advisor, particularly the Honorable Attorney General, as to the statement made by Mr. President in the interview on Arise Television to the fact that he had instructed the Attorney General to come up with the Gazette of the law of grazing routes. I've particularly studied laws both in the north and the south. There's no single legislation that talk about grazing routes. So I wonder what kind of advice the legal team actually giving him coming up with that position. And as a citizen of the country, as a patriot, I felt that this is not a personal matter. It's a matter that Nigerian people need to have accurate knowledge about the matter. And as I pointed out, even the grazing reserves law that are in existence are only applicable in the northern Nigeria because they are made as Northern Nigerian Law number 4 of 1965, and they don't have general application in southern Nigeria. So to that, even the president had no business with such legislation. The president can only exercise executive power by Section 5 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended on legislation made by National Assembly or deemed by Section 218 of the 1999 Constitution as amended as having been deemed to have been made by the National Assembly. So it's currently Mr. President had not been properly advised, and it is proper to put this in correct path done so that the unnecessary to the proper place it is, and that we should start taking of proper mode of modern animal husbandry, which is in the nature of ranching or proper grazing reserves under a situation whereby open grazing will be banned and people can carry on their business of animal husbandry in a modern manner that will not impact on the property, welfare, and security of other people.
Any people who will interpret based on depending on whatever side of the divide they find themselves according to as far as the laws and the constitution are concerned. But from your perspective, who has responsibility to take charge of some of these things around grazing reserves, grazing routes, and all of that? Because I remember back in time, even from the statement that you put out, the regions back then, they created grazing reserves for themselves by law and all of that. So is it something that the federal government should be legislating on, or is something left for the states?
It's not a matter for legislative intervention by the National Assembly and by the federal government. There is this tendency for us to see the country as a unitary state, because everybody wants something that must be done by National Assembly. On several occasions, I've highlighted at the plenary of National Assembly that we have to act according to the constitutional delineation of power as stipulated in the Constitution. What do I mean? Nigerian Constitution has a legislative list in the exclusive legislative list, which is the exclusive preserve of the National Assembly. They are itemized about 66 items. Then there's the concurrent legislative list. Even this concurrent legislative list, the area on which the National Assembly can legislate and that of the state were clearly delineated. The fact that the subject matter is on concurrent list does not mean that the National Assembly can legislate or the state can legislate. There is a clear bifurcation of the competence, even on matter on exclusive legislative list. Then there is a provision of Section 4, Subsection 7 of the 1999 Constitution, which provide that any other matters not so listed either in the exclusive legislative list or in the concurrent legislative list are within the province and exclusive power of the state assembly and the state government. As far as I'm concerned, the only item that has to do with agriculture in the concurrent legislative list only limited the National Assembly to matters of research, planning, and finance in relation to agriculture. So my position has always been that agriculture is a matter on the residual list within the competence of the state. And this contention is actually supported by the fact that the existing grazing laws operate as state legislation and federal legislation. But what we have had is that the hangover of military intervention, every subject matter National Assembly will want to legislate upon, every matter Nigerians will think that National Assembly can act upon. But for us to be able to live to the true yearnings and aspirations of our founding fathers, we need to go back to federalism. We need to, even as challenging as the existing provision are to realization of genuine federalism, we need to adhere by those provisions. So as far as I'm concerned, on grazing matters, the National Assembly has no business and the federal government has no business beyond research, planning, and possibly assisting in terms of finance.
Well, Senator, you talked about that hangover of the military. I'm wondering what that means. But we'll take that on when we come back from this break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Well, Senator, the metaphor you used of the hangover of the military is quite interesting, because a number of people will also be wondering what other areas of our national life do you think will still have that hangover? Consequently, hence the call or the consistent, repeated call for true federalism.
Yeah, the greatest manifestation of the hangover of military is the drift towards unitarism. And this is not only in terms of the constitutional provision, but also in regard to even the way our executive at the federal level relates with the executive at the state level. They still continue to act as if the federating units are mere appendages of the central government. The whole essence of federalism is to have two levels of government, both interdependent and one not seen as superior to the other. But the way the structure of the government is today, and also because of the nature of even the resource allocation, you see that the states are still functioning as they used to be under military. Military is a structure that is hierarchical. So their intervention in government has brought that hierarchical thinking into governance, which is clearly antithetical to the concept and practice of federalism, both conceptually and the way it ought to be. So there is really a need for us. And another aspect of even this military hangover is even the perception of the utility or otherwise of the National Assembly. You will realize that because there was no legislative arm during military rule, from 1966 up to 1979, and after the 1983 December 31 coup until 1999, in the real sense of it, there's this only thought about whether a government can actually run without a National Assembly, whereas the basis of democratic governance is the representation at the National Assembly by which laws are made for good government of the country. And in fact, the way sections 4 and 5 of the 1999 Constitution interrelated will mean that the executive power is actually to be circumscribed within the legislative competence and law made by the National Assembly or otherwise are expressly stated in the Constitution. So really, there ought not to be executive powers outside the context of implementation of legislation made by the National Assembly. So these are part of the challenges that our democratic governance is facing. And of course, with sustaining the democracy beyond the level we are today, we'll be able to possibly get over those hangover. And that's why every item, everybody wants National Assembly to make legislation. Things that are even within the competence of the state, the bulk will be thought to be at the table of the National Assembly or the federal government.
Do you see a very strong role for the National Assembly here to ensure that this return to federalism goes beyond paper? And do you think National Assembly will actually stand up and be counted this time?
I think I can speak for myself and speak for some other like minds. But just like the country is heterogeneous, the same thing also National Assembly have people with different ideas and different perspectives. But just as I said at the plenary where we had submissions on assessment of the 2-year of the 9th Assembly, I indicated and I still believe that Nigerians are expecting the present constitutional review exercise are being carried on by the National Assembly not just to be a cosmetic affair. And Nigerians are looking towards us as representatives of the people to address problem of structure of governance, to address the issue of devolution of power, to address the issue of fiscal federalism, and have a government that is able to deliver on welfare and security of the people within the context of relevant provisions being amended to ensure an effective government that's able to address yearnings and aspirations having been expressed by Nigerians participating at the public hearings at the zonal level and at the national public hearing.
Senator, given the scenario in the country regarding security, and we know politics can happen at different stages, but do you ever think it will be fathomable for anyone not to want change and be on the same page to the extent that something needs to be done about, for instance, the security architecture of this country?
In fact, without doing something fundamental, something very radical, something extraordinary on our security architecture, the many gains, the many advances, the many benefits that has accrued from the effort of our president in the area of infrastructure and the area of business and energizing the economy will be overshadowed by the challenge in the security architecture. For instance, at the level of Constitutional Review Committee, I sponsored a bill on state police. I think my colleague, even in another party, Senator Eke Ekweremadu, has also similarly sponsored a bill on state police. The argument that has always been about state police is that there's propensity for it to be abused by governors. But the truth is that we have tried this federal unitary police, and it has shown that it has become abysmally inadequate. Then let us try the other one too. All over the world, there's always propensity for abuse of power by anybody that has coercive authority. But the safeguard against such abusive use of power has always been to strengthen judiciary and uphold the rule of law. I think with this in mind, we could be able to look into that. But beyond that, the 9th Assembly also set up an ad hoc committee headed by Senate leader Dr. Yahya Abdullahi, and came up with far-reaching resolution that even the existing police structure should be decentralized along zonal line, operationally and budgetarily, so that they will not become unwieldy. A situation whereby one man sits atop of the hierarchy of police formations of about 5,650 throughout the length and breadth of Nigeria, with a population of 180 to 200 million, of course, shows inadequacies of the existing security architecture. We still engaging in discussions at the National Assembly and, of course, with the executive on the need for us to do something radical, something that touch on decentralization and making professionalization and proper equipment of the Nigerian security structure to be effective. And I believe that the focus of the supplementary budget being brought by the executive to the National Assembly mainly address the problem of security, strengthening the security and civil defense, and also making a necessary appropriation for training, appropriation for equipment for the Nigerian military. I think with this and proper supervision, we'll be able to address it. But fundamentally, we cannot continue to talk about insecurity and then leave the existing structure that obviously, and I say with all sense of responsibility, have failed us as Nigerian people.
Shed some light on the workings of the National Assembly on this matter, if you will. Is it that those who belong to perhaps your school of thought who think something should be done about policing are not convincing the naysayers such that they don't see reason why something should be done? And why is it that they can't list the concerns they have and then it be debated decently on the floor?
Actually, the process of lawmaking is as stages. Like, for instance, the bill on the state police has passed the second reading, by which it has gone to the Constitutional Review Committee, which is the committee that will look into it. But I also know that some of my colleagues in the North have actually had discussion with me. I wouldn't want to mention name, but they are also equally concerned about the need to decentralize Nigerian security architecture, but coming from the experience of the local native police authority in the North, which I understood was very nasty. They were still like shy of issue of state police. So the idea has been that we could come up with a middle way approach of decentralizing the existing police structure along zonal lines with operational and budgetary autonomy. And in this regard, I've introduced a bill along the line of this suggestion to just, by way of belts and braces. And the bill will enter second reading, hopefully before we go on recess for summer. And I believe that with the advocacy and the concern of practically everybody in the National Assembly, I must say that if there has been what has preoccupied us in terms of resolutions and motions in the past 2 years, it has been the area of security, the area of economy, and the area of health. The security area being topmost as to our concern. So I believe that the lethargy, Idado on this matter is getting definitely winning off.
Now the question would be, how far is the National Assembly willing to go to achieve this? I mean, you talked about strengthening other arms of government such that one is not too powerful. But what we have already gives the National Assembly some powers. So if this bill is passed eventually, it still needs to be signed off by the president, as it were. Is the National Assembly willing to, for example, veto the president in the case where the president doesn't assent that bill, just to ensure that this is achieved?
I think it is, as a politician, I think I would rather keep my gunpowder on such issues that we can resolve by consensus and by interface with the executive. I think Mr. President is equally concerned about addressing the issue of security, and with proper advice and proper interface with the executive, I think there will not be problem in having a mutually agreeable legislation that will address the problem of insecurity.
So this takes me back to something you said earlier when we began this conversation about the kind of advice the president gets. I mean, this talk about grazing routes, reserves, and the rest is kind of like in two ways. Yes, there's the laws and the debates, which you said there isn't anyway. And then there's the advice the president gets, the legal advice he gets from time to time. You have questioned this particular advice on the grazing routes. And for a lot of people, they're thinking, if this one is if it's questionable, just how many other advice the president has gotten might be questionable. So regarding that one, Is there any way around it, really? Senator Basiru, can you hear me? Okay, we'll work on getting him back to respond to that question. Okay, if you can go again, please. We lost you for a bit there.
Okay, I said I need to be circumspect, not to make, to commit fallacy of generalization. I can only talk about the specific areas that I thought that the president might not have been properly, advised, and that is in the area of this grazing issue. And earlier on, too, I actually pointed out the error in the opinion of the Honorable Attorney General when he was trying to equate regulating grazing with motor parts sellers in northern Nigeria. I found it very unfortunate, and as somebody who is sworn to uphold the Constitution, I had to also intervene publicly at that time. So I think we should be able to, as a public office holder, particularly some of us who are shadowing responsibility of interpreting and implementing law, need to be circumspect, need to possibly have second opinion before we advise our chief executive. And I say this because I've had the privilege of serving as an attorney general in my state, and I know that the chief executive rely very weightily on advice, particularly on legal and constitutional matter coming from the attorney general. So I will want to say that we expect as Nigerians from the office of attorney general to be more circumspect, to possibly get second opinion on matters of national importance in rendering advice to Mr. President. I think that's, we are not begrudging him. I would not have anything against him. He was chairman of body of Attorney General when I was Attorney General in my state. But there is a need for us to give a proper advice and properly appraise issue within the context of the law, and not to take anything on face value, particularly matters that are capable of generating tension in the country.
You know, one of such advice that I know concerns the National Assembly, or that concerned the National Assembly, was last year when that invitation was, given to the president, as it were, to come address the nation regarding the security situation in the country. And you know the back and forth that happened, the speaker saying, well, the president had agreed to, speak to Nigerians. By extension, he was speaking to the National Assembly, but of course to Nigerians. So do you think that advice, for example, the president didn't eventually honor that invitation, as it were, would you have called that sound advice?
On that matter, you must be able to know that we have a two-chamber parliament, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Senate never asked the president to appear before it, so there was no such invitation. And when my opinion was sought on the matter, I said I would rather not render opinion on it, because it is not really a matter for the Senate. But if you ask me, I will say that there's a deep invitation is an extension that you may honor or may not honor as act of courtesy to those who are inviting you. It's different legally from what is called summon. In view of the existing constitutional arrangement, and I say it with all sense of responsibility, and at the risk of being branded a sycophant, the Nigerian law does not allow the National Assembly to summon on the pain of arrest a president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So perhaps the arm of the National Assembly were the one that did not take proper advice. So it's not in all cases that the executive that is in the wrong side of not taking proper advice. There's a difference between invitation. If you invite me to your house, for instance, Chamberlain, I may decide to honor the invitation or not to honor. It's different from when a summon which has a criminal implication is summoned. By Section 318 of our Constitution, I don't think the president could be so coerced to appear before any legislative authority.
Well, Senator, how significantly do you think the Constitution Review or any council can address the challenges we're having, not adequately giving attention to the youths?
I think the question of youth, I'm happy to say that at the National public hearing at the International Conference Center, I was part of it, and there was representation by some youth organization. I think really in the country, the peculiar challenges that youth have has to do with improving our economy, access to education, access to health, and of course improve security. And when you look at it by extension, practically whether you are young or old is also very important. Where I have issues with some of the recommendations being brought forward is the idea of saying a particular person of a particular age will not aspire to leadership of his country. With utmost respect, that will also itself be undemocratic. What I believe is that youth should have equal access, having acquired necessary experience and necessary instrumentality to be able to access power. But to now seek to exclude a certain age group from accessing power, I think it would not be democratic. That too is also very important that youth should engage in the political process. The way by which you affect change and get impact in a democratic setting is through party politics. But when you just stay on social media, or you just write articles without forming or joining political party, participating actively so that you will be able to put yourself for election and then implement whatever policies and program you believe is in the best interest of the country, you are not really participating in civic engagement capable of changing our society. As a young person, I participated actively in student union activities, and right from my early 30s, I've been engaged in active politics, and that has enabled me to be part of policy making in my state, and of course now at the National Assembly. And with what I believe to be fundamental, I'm able to express it within the context of that democratic experience. So rather than allow ourselves to go to the extreme as young people to seek to even be destroying the social fabric of the society that ultimately we are going to be inheritors, we ought to challenge within the context of democratic aspirations. No doubt it's challenging to play politics anywhere in the world. I will not say in the third world, more daunting in the third world, but then for everybody that aspire to make and effect change in the society, it must aspire to be part of political process, and through that process seeking to effect change, which may be incremental at some point and may be substantive depending on the balance of pendulum of power.
One more thing, Senator, as we wind down, and speaking about the political process, do we still expect the electoral bill by when? June, July?
Definitely, the leadership of the National Assembly has given assurance that before we proceed on the annual recess, the petroleum industry bill, the electoral bill, as well as the constitutional review bill will pass through the National Assembly. And I'm particularly optimistic because I have been monitoring the process and I've been part of some of the process, being members of some of the relevant committee working on this very important legislation. It will meet the expectation of Nigerians if we're able to meet those deadlines.
Well, yes, indeed. All eyes will be on that to ensure that that happens. But we do thank you very much indeed for your time, Senator Ajibola Bashir, Chairman, Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs.
It's my pleasure being here. Thank you, Chamberlain.